Welcome to Chosen Soul, Chosen One. Funny how the entire atmosphere changes the moment you walk into the room. People who once spoke boldly suddenly become quiet, eyes shift, conversations change. The confidence disappears. They try to pretend nothing happened, but deep down they know exactly what they are feeling. They are watching someone they thought would never rise, standing taller than ever. They expected you to stay broken. They expected you to remain the person they could overlook, manipulate, underestimate, and disrespect. But they forgot one thing. You were never as weak as they imagined. You were simply patient. You were simply choosing peace. You were giving people more chances than they deserved. And there is a massive difference between being powerless and having the power to destroy something. But choosing not to. For years they mistook your kindness for weakness. They mistook your silence for fear. They mistook your forgiveness for permission. They thought because you didn't fight back, you couldn't. They were wrong. You weren't losing. You were learning. Every betrayal taught you something. Every disappointment sharpened you. Every rejection strengthened you. Every moment they tried to humiliate you became another layer of armor around the person you were becoming. And then one day something changed. You didn't become cruel. You didn't become evil. You didn't lose your heart. You simply stopped shrinking. You stopped apologizing for taking up space. You stopped explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stopped begging people to recognize your value. And that was the moment everything changed. Because the version of you they were comfortable with no longer existed. The angel they thought they could control finally understood that having a gentle heart doesn't mean having weak boundaries. Your softness was never your weakness. Your softness was your strength. They just didn't understand what happens when someone with a good heart finally reaches their limit. Think about everything you survived, those nights when you cried silently, those moments when you wondered why people kept hurting you, the times you forgave people who never apologized, the times you stayed quiet because you didn't want to create conflict, the times you swallowed your truth just to keep everyone else comfortable. You carried more than people ever knew, and somehow you kept going. That is what they failed to understand. They thought they were breaking you, but every attack was building something inside you. Every disappointment was revealing your strength. Every betrayal was teaching you discernment. Every closed door was forcing you toward a different path. And now they are looking at you wondering, how did they become this strong? They don't understand that the person standing in front of them was built in the very seasons they thought would destroy you. There was always something inside you. Even when you were younger, you could feel it. You noticed things other people ignored. You felt when something wasn't right. You saw through certain people, even when you couldn't explain why. And many times you held yourself back because you didn't want to hurt anyone. That restraint wasn't weakness. That was self-control. You were a storm pretending to be a gentle breeze. You had power long before you knew how to use it. And now, the storm has learned its direction. The people who once mocked you are watching from a distance. The people who underestimated you are questioning their own decisions. The people who believed you would never recover are witnessing your comeback. And the most powerful part, you don't have to prove anything. You don't need revenge. You don't need to announce your transformation. You don't need to chase anyone for an explanation. Your life is becoming the explanation. Your peace is becoming the answer. Your growth is becoming the evidence, and your silence. Your silence is saying more than their gossip ever could. If this message is speaking directly to your spirit, take a moment right now and recognize how far you've come. You are not the same person who once begged to be understood. You are not the same person who accepted disrespect just to keep the peace. You are not the same person who constantly questioned whether you were enough. That version of you served its purpose. Now you're stepping into another level. And before we continue, type 777 in the comments if you've reached the point where you refuse to. Shrink yourself for people who were never meant to understand your journey. Let 777 mark the moment you stopped abandoning yourself just to make other people comfortable. Because from this point forward, things don't simply change. They flip. Number 1. They mistook your halo for a handle. This is where they made their biggest mistake. They saw your patience and assumed they could keep testing you. They saw your kindness and assumed you would tolerate anything. They saw your peaceful nature and assumed you would never stand up for yourself. So they kept pushing. One insult, then another. One betrayal, then another. One disappointment, then another. They kept testing the boundaries of someone who rarely showed them. Until one day, you stopped explaining. You stopped reacting. You simply stepped back and let people experience the consequences of their own choices. And suddenly, everything changed, because the person they thought they could control was gone. The person standing before them had boundaries, had confidence, had discernment, had standards, had finally discovered the power of walking away. They pushed the innocent one too far, and that was their mistake. You didn't become someone else. You finally became fully yourself. The version of you they fear isn't evil, it's not cruel, it's not bitter, it's simply untouchable. It is the version of you that knows its worth, the version that doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't compete, doesn't explain every move, doesn't need approval, and doesn't return to places that required you to become smaller just to belong. That is your other side. Not darkness, not destruction, discernment, not revenge, boundaries, not hatred, self-respect. And perhaps the greatest lesson of your entire journey is this. Sometimes people don't realize how valuable your kindness was until they no longer have access to it. So let them wonder, let them watch, let them question how you became so different. You don't owe them the old version of you. You owe yourself the freedom to become everything you were meant to become. Chosen one. The chapter where you constantly prove your worth is ending. The chapter where you protect your peace is beginning, and the people who once believed you were easy to break are about to discover something they should have understood from the beginning. You were never breakable. You were becoming. And now they finally get to witness what you were becoming all along. They thought angels never evolve. They thought a gentle soul would always remain gentle in the same way. They thought because you forgave, you would always forgive. Because you stayed quiet, you would always stay silent. Because you gave people another chance, they assumed there would always be another chance waiting. But they forgot something. Even the strongest light needs boundaries. You were never weak. You were learning, you were healing, you were becoming. And every wound they thought would destroy you was quietly teaching you how to protect the person you were becoming. They saw your kindness and called it weakness. They saw your patience and called it permission. They saw your loyalty and treated it like an obligation. They saw your heart and assumed they could keep taking from it without consequence. But every person has a limit, and yours wasn't a moment of destruction. It was a moment of awakening. One day, you simply stopped. You stopped explaining yourself to people determined to misunderstand you. You stopped chasing people who only valued you when you were convenient. You stopped defending your character against people who had already decided to judge you. You stopped shrinking just because your growth made someone uncomfortable. And suddenly the version of you they had become comfortable with disappeared. Not because you became cold, because you became clear, not because you became cruel, because you developed boundaries, not because you stopped caring, because you finally started caring about yourself too. And that is what they never expected. They were prepared for your breakdown. They were prepared for you to come back. They were prepared for another apology, another explanation, another chance. What they were not prepared for was your peace. They weren't prepared for the day you stopped reacting. They weren't prepared for the day their words stopped controlling your emotions. They weren't prepared for the day you could hear their opinion and keep walking. They weren't prepared for the day your absence became more powerful than your presence ever was. Because once you stop giving someone access to your peace, they can no longer use your emotions as a doorway into your life. Think about everything that brought you here. The little betrayals they called jokes, the disrespect they told you to ignore, the manipulation disguised as concern, the moments they made you question your own reality, the times they drained your energy and then blamed you for being exhausted, the times you were there for everyone while quietly falling apart yourself. They thought you would carry their chaos forever. They thought your heart had unlimited space for people who refused to respect it. They were wrong. Your heart didn't become smaller. Your standards became higher, and there is a difference. The angel they pushed didn't disappear. That angel evolved. The compassion stayed. The wisdom grew. The love remained, but the boundaries became stronger. And that transformation changes everything. Because people who benefited from your lack of boundaries will always struggle when you finally develop them. They may call you different. Let them. They may say you've changed. You have. They may say you're distant. Maybe you're simply no longer available for what once drained you. They may wonder why you don't respond the way you used to. Because you learned that not every situation deserves your energy. Not every accusation deserves an explanation. Not every person deserves access. And not every door needs to remain open. Chosen one, understand this. Healing doesn't always look like becoming softer. Sometimes healing looks like becoming wiser. Sometimes healing looks like walking away. Sometimes healing looks like saying no without guilt. Sometimes healing looks like choosing peace over proving a point. And sometimes the strongest response you can give someone who hurt you is to build a life they no longer have access to. That's what makes your transformation so powerful. You didn't need revenge. You didn't need to destroy anyone. You didn't need to expose every secret. You simply healed. And your healing became the evidence that their actions did not have the final word. They expected their treatment of you to define you. Instead, it refined you. They expected you to remain trapped in the identity they created for you. Instead, you discovered who you were without their approval. They wanted you uncertain. You became confident. They wanted you dependent. You became independent. They wanted you afraid of standing alone. You discovered that standing alone is sometimes where you finally hear your own voice. And now they don't recognize you. Of course they don't. They only knew the version of you that tolerated what you should have never tolerated. They knew the version that over-explained, the version that overgave, the version that kept saying, "It's okay," when it wasn't. They knew the version that kept opening the door. They never met the version that learned how to close it. And that version is here now, not angry, not bitter, awake. There is a massive difference between revenge and elevation. Revenge says, "I want you to suffer." Elevation says, "I no longer need you to matter." That's your power. You don't have to defeat everyone who doubted you. You don't have to convince every critic. You don't have to make everyone understand your journey. Your responsibility is not to win every argument. Your responsibility is to become so aligned with your purpose that distractions lose their grip on you. That is real strength. That is real transformation. That is the other side of you they never expected to see. Let me tell you a story. There was once a gentle soul who kept allowing the same person to cross the same boundary. Every time it happened, they forgave. Every time it happened, they hoped things would change. Every time it happened, they blamed themselves for caring too much. Then one morning, something inside them became completely still. They didn't scream. They didn't threaten. They didn't seek revenge. They simply realized, "I don't have to keep returning to what keeps hurting me." So they walked away, and at first nothing seemed different. Then the days became weeks. The weeks became months, and slowly that person began rebuilding their life. Their confidence returned, their peace returned, their smile returned, their purpose returned. And eventually they understood something profound. They hadn't lost someone. They had lost the version of themselves that kept accepting less than they deserved. That was the real victory. And that may be your story too. Because sometimes God doesn't remove people from your life to punish them. Sometimes He removes them because you are finally ready to walk into a season where their presence is no longer necessary. Your transformation wasn't random. It was built through every lesson, every closed door, every disappointment, every moment you had to choose yourself, every night you thought you couldn't continue and somehow you woke up the next morning and did. That's why your strength feels different now. It isn't borrowed from applause. It isn't dependent on approval. It was forged through experience. And now your peace has become something you protect. Your time has become something you value. Your energy has become something you guard. Your heart has become something you no longer hand to everyone who asks. That isn't arrogance. That's wisdom. So if someone says you've changed, smile, because you were supposed to. If someone says you're not as available as before, they're right. If someone says you don't react the way you used to, they're right again. You learned. You grew. You awakened. And the most powerful part of your story is this. You didn't become the person who hurt you. You became the person who finally knew how to protect yourself from being hurt the same way again. The angel survived. The angel healed. The angel grew stronger. And now the angel has boundaries. So walk forward without guilt. Love without losing yourself. Forgive without reopening every door. Be kind without becoming available to everyone. And protect your peace without explaining why. Because your next chapter does not require the permission of the people who misunderstood your last. 1. They thought your light made you weak. They were wrong. Your light survived the darkness. Your heart survived the betrayal. Your spirit survived the disappointment. And now the same soul they underestimated is becoming the strongest version of itself. Chosen one, remember this: you don't need to become harder to become stronger. You need to become clearer. You don't need revenge, you need direction. You don't need to prove your worth. You need to live from it. And you don't need to chase anyone who walked away from you. Keep walking. Because the moment you stop shrinking for people who were uncomfortable with your light is the moment your real life begins. Chosen one, you are the mirror they never wanted to face. And here is the final truth that closes this chapter. They didn't awaken your darkness. They awakened your balance. They awakened the part of you that finally knows when enough is enough. The part of you that no longer begs for a seat at tables you have already outgrown. The part of you that understands your heart is valuable and not everyone deserves access to it. You didn't become cruel, you became conscious. You didn't become heartless. You became protective of your heart. You didn't become cold. You became selective about where you place your warmth. This isn't revenge, this is evolution. This is reclamation. This is you taking back the identity you were forced to hide just to keep other people comfortable. They pushed an angel too far, and without realizing it, they introduced the world to a version of you that no longer needs their approval. The version that stands firm, the version that walks away, the version that says, no more. And now watch what happens. Watch how quickly the story changes when you stop participating in the story they created about you. Watch how loud their silence becomes. Watch how uncomfortable they become when they realize they no longer control your emotions. Watch how your absence says what your explanations never could. Because your greatest transformation isn't that you learned how to fight people. It's that you learned you don't have to. You don't need to destroy anyone. You simply stopped allowing them to destroy pieces of you. That is your rise. That is your turning point. That is your confirmation. Number 2, they feared your light, but still played with your fire. Isn't it strange? People love your light until your light exposes what they were hiding. They loved your kindness when it benefited them. They loved your patience when it gave them more chances. They loved your forgiveness when it protected them from consequences. But the moment you stopped sacrificing yourself for their comfort, suddenly you became different. Suddenly you became cold. Suddenly you became too much. Funny, isn't it? They never complained about your kindness when they were receiving it. They only complained when you stopped giving it away. They wanted your light, but they never respected the boundaries protecting it. They wanted your loyalty, but they treated it like an unlimited resource. They wanted your forgiveness, but they never wanted to change. They wanted the angel without respecting the person carrying the wings. They created a version of you in their minds that made them comfortable. A version that would always forgive, always understand, always return, always stay. But that version was never the complete you. You were never just softness. You were softness with strength. You were compassion with discernment. You were patience with limits. And when those limits were finally reached, they discovered what they should have respected from the beginning. You can be gentle without being weak. You can be loving without being available to everyone. You can forgive someone without giving them another opportunity to hurt you. You can have a good heart and still have strong boundaries. That is what they misunderstood. They thought your silence meant you had nothing to say. They didn't realize you were observing. They thought your patience meant you couldn't respond. They didn't realize you were choosing not to. They thought your kindness meant you had no power. They didn't realize your restraint was the power. Imagine a blade wrapped in silk. From a distance, all anyone sees is softness, elegance, beauty, calmness. But underneath, strength, precision, protection. They kept touching the silk because they thought the softness made them safe. They never understood that the softness was covering something powerful. And when the silk finally fell away, they realized they had misunderstood you completely. But here's the important part. You didn't reveal your strength to hurt them. You revealed it because you finally understood that your strength was necessary to protect your peace. That is a completely different kind of power. Real strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it walks away quietly. Sometimes it blocks the door. Sometimes it stops responding. Sometimes it chooses peace when revenge would be easier. Sometimes it says, I love you, but I will no longer allow you to mistreat me. That is maturity. That is power. That is evolution. Think about how long you tried to keep the peace. How many times you swallowed your truth. How many times you forgave before you were ready. How many times you gave people another opportunity because you believed they could become better. You gave mercy, and mercy is beautiful. But mercy without boundaries can become self-abandonment. There comes a moment when protecting everyone else's feelings begins costing you your own. And that is where you had to draw the line. Not because you stopped caring, because you finally realized you matter too. Imagine sitting in a room full of people who claim to love you, while secretly hoping you never discover your own worth. Imagine giving peace and receiving chaos, giving understanding and receiving manipulation, giving loyalty and receiving betrayal. You lived inside that contradiction for too long. And now they are confused by your evolution, but why? They saw the transformation happening. They simply didn't believe you would finish it. They thought you would eventually return to the old version of yourself. The one who tolerated everything, the one who apologized first, the one who explained every decision, the one who stayed long after the relationship had stopped being healthy. But you didn't return. You kept growing. And that's why they call you changed. Yes, you changed. That was the point. You were never meant to remain the same person forever. Growth changes your standards. Healing changes your tolerance. Wisdom changes your circle. Self-respect changes your boundaries. And purpose changes your priorities. So if someone says, you're not the same anymore, don't panic. Maybe that's the greatest compliment they could give you. Because you were never supposed to become the same person who accepted what once broke you. You reclaimed your wings, and now they're surprised by your wingspan. You reclaimed your voice, and now they're uncomfortable that you use it. You reclaimed your peace, and now they can't disturb it the way they used to. You reclaimed your power, and now they realize how much influence they once had over you. But here's the truth. They didn't lose control of you overnight. You simply stopped giving it away. Think of a volcano. For years it looks peaceful, still, quiet, almost harmless. People walk around it without thinking about what exists beneath the surface. But beneath that calm pressure is building, not hatred, not revenge, pressure. And eventually the pressure demands change. That's what happened to you. You didn't suddenly become someone else. You reached the point where the old version of you could no longer survive. So you evolved. And now people who benefited from your silence are uncomfortable with your voice. People who benefited from your insecurity are uncomfortable with your confidence. People who benefited from your lack of boundaries are uncomfortable with your standards. People who benefited from your constant availability are uncomfortable with your distance. And some of them may even try to make you feel guilty for changing. Don't fall for it. Sometimes people call your boundaries attitude because your boundaries prevent them from getting what they want. Sometimes people call your confidence arrogance because your confidence makes their manipulation ineffective. Sometimes people call your healing coldness because your healing means they can no longer trigger the version of you they controlled. Don't confuse their discomfort with your wrongdoing, and don't let their reaction convince you to return to an old version of yourself. You are not the villain because you finally chose yourself. You are not selfish because you stopped accepting disrespect. You are not cruel because you stopped explaining your boundaries. You are not cold because you learned to protect your peace. You became undeniable. And there is a difference. Real angels aren't people who endlessly sacrifice themselves until nothing remains. Real strength is knowing what deserves your energy and what doesn't. Knowing when to speak, knowing when to remain silent, knowing when to forgive, knowing when to walk away, knowing when a door should stay closed. And chosen one, you have always carried something they couldn't fully understand. You could see through people without needing to expose them. You could sense when something wasn't right. You could love deeply without needing applause. You could stand alone without becoming bitter. And that is why they couldn't completely control you. They may have influenced you for a season. They may have hurt you. They may have delayed you. They may have made you question yourself. But they never owned your future. They never owned your identity. And they certainly don't own your next chapter. So let them talk. Let them misunderstand. Let them create whatever explanation makes them comfortable. You don't have to correct every false story. Your life will eventually speak louder. Your peace will speak. Your discipline will speak. Your growth will speak. Your character will speak. And one day the people who thought they knew exactly who you were will realize something they should have understood from the beginning. They were never dealing with someone they could break. They were watching someone become stronger. They didn't destroy your light. They taught you how to protect it. They didn't end your story. They pushed you into your next chapter. They didn't awaken your darkness. They awakened your balance. And now you know exactly who you are. Kind, but not controllable. Loving, but not easily manipulated. Forgiving, but not endlessly available. Peaceful, but not powerless. Gentle, but not breakable. And that is the version of you they never prepared to meet. The version that finally knows its worth. The version that no longer begs to be chosen. The version that chooses itself. And from this moment forward, you don't have to prove anything. You just have to keep walking. Because the greatest revenge against everything that tried to break you isn't destroying it. It's becoming so whole that it no longer has power over you. Chosen one, your wings are back. Your voice is back. Your peace is back. And this time, you're not giving them away. And what do people do when they can't control something powerful? They try to convince it that it's broken. They tried that with you. They tried to rewrite your identity. They tried to make you question your worth. They tried to make you believe that your sensitivity was a weakness and your strength was a problem. But in the end, they didn't reveal what was wrong with you. They revealed what was wrong with them. Here is the painful truth that eventually becomes freeing. Your transformation did not betray them. It exposed them. The moment you stopped accepting their version of you, their story started falling apart. The moment you stopped questioning yourself, their manipulation lost its power. The moment you started standing in your truth, their excuses stopped making sense. And when you finally embraced every part of yourself, the gentle part, the strong part, the wise part, the part that knows when to stay and the part that knows when to walk away, they no longer knew how to define you. Imagine a mirror cracking straight down the middle. The crack isn't always destruction. Sometimes it's separation. Sometimes it's clarity. Sometimes it's the moment you finally realize this belongs in my future, that belongs in my past. That is what happened when you evolved. You didn't have to push everyone away. You simply stopped reaching backward. You didn't become unreachable because you wanted to punish anyone. You became unreachable because you finally learned where your energy belongs. And now they're searching for explanations. Why are you different? Why don't you react anymore? Why don't you chase? Why don't you argue? Why don't you need their approval? Because the version of you they understood was built around survival. The version standing here now is built around self-respect, and here's what they'll never admit. They sensed your potential before you fully recognized it yourself. That's why your confidence made them uncomfortable. That's why your independence threatened them. That's why they benefited whenever you doubted yourself. They didn't fear the person you were. They feared the person you were becoming. And what you're experiencing now isn't the creation of someone new. It's a return. A return to the confidence you had before people taught you to question yourself. A return to the courage you had before rejection made you cautious. A return to the clarity you had before manipulation made you second-guess your instincts. A return to the person you were before the world convinced you that being smaller would make everyone else more comfortable. They called you different because they benefited from the confused version of you. Now that you're clear, they can no longer hide behind your confusion. So let this truth settle deep inside you. You didn't become someone new. You finally became who you were always capable of becoming. And that is why your life feels different. Number 3, they built your awakening with their own hands. Nothing unsettles a person more than watching someone they tried to control become completely independent. Let's be honest, there was a time when you were brighter than you allowed yourself to be. You had ideas, you had confidence, you had a strong presence, you had a voice. But because you cared about people, you sometimes made yourself smaller. You lowered your expectations. You softened your words. You ignored your instincts. You gave people the benefit of the doubt long after they stopped deserving it. Why? Because you had empathy. Because you wanted peace. Because you believed people could change. But there was a cost. Every time you ignored yourself to keep someone else comfortable, you lost a little connection with your own voice. So eventually you went quiet. But here's what they misunderstood. You weren't broken. You were rebuilding. You weren't disappearing. You were going inward. You weren't losing your power. You were learning how to control it. Your silence became your classroom. Your solitude became your reset. Your disappointments became your teachers. And while they thought you were falling behind, you were becoming harder to manipulate. That's why they may suddenly want the old you back. The old version was easier to predict, easier to influence, easier to guilt, easier to convince. But this version thinks before responding. This version notices patterns. This version asks questions. This version doesn't ignore red flags just because someone has a familiar face. This version has learned. They pushed you into silence, and you discovered your own voice. They forced you to step back, and you discovered your own direction. They made you question everyone, and eventually you learned to trust yourself again. That's not damage. That's development. Number 4, they thought you were falling, but you were building armor. People often say, you've changed, when they no longer benefit from the person you used to be. They expected your pain to become your permanent identity. They expected your disappointment to defeat you. They expected you to remain available to the same people who repeatedly crossed your boundaries. But they misunderstood what was happening. You weren't collapsing, you were restructuring your life. Every betrayal taught you discernment. Every disappointment taught you standards. Every broken promise taught you to watch actions instead of words. Every painful chapter taught you how to recognize what peace actually feels like. Think of a feather becoming steel. Not because it stopped being beautiful, but because it learned how to survive. Your wings didn't disappear, they strengthened. Every lesson added another layer of wisdom. Every boundary became another piece of protection. Every time you chose yourself, your confidence grew. And eventually you reached a point where you could walk through difficult situations without losing yourself inside them. That is not a fall, that is growth. You didn't become harder because you stopped caring. You became stronger because you finally understood that caring for everyone else cannot require abandoning yourself. And if you're asking, was I wrong for becoming this version of me? No. The mistake was believing you had to remain small forever. You were never meant to be everyone's emergency solution. You were never meant to carry everyone's emotional weight. You were never meant to be the person people returned to only when they needed something. Every boundary they ignored taught you how to enforce the next one. Every time they twisted your words taught you to communicate more clearly. Every time they questioned your reality taught you to trust your own experience. They didn't destroy you, they accidentally taught you how to stand without them. And now you can walk through fire without becoming fire. You can enter chaos without becoming chaotic. You can experience rejection without rejecting yourself. You can lose people without losing your identity. That is the version of you they can no longer control. Number 5, their old tricks stopped working. Nothing surprises a manipulator more than discovering their favorite tactic no longer affects you. The guilt doesn't work, the pressure doesn't work, the silent treatment doesn't work. The empty promises don't work. The sudden apologies don't automatically pull you back in. Why? Because you learned the pattern, and once you recognize a pattern, you stop confusing it with love. They misunderstood what made you strong. They thought your heart was open because you were naive. It wasn't. Your heart was open because you believed in people. But wisdom taught you something important. An open heart still needs a guarded door. You don't have to become suspicious of everyone. You simply have to become discerning about who earns your trust. You don't have to stop loving. You simply have to stop abandoning yourself in the name of love. You don't have to stop forgiving. You simply have to understand that forgiveness does not require unlimited access. And that lesson changed everything. Imagine someone repeatedly pressing the same button, expecting the same reaction, until one day the button no longer works. They press again, nothing, again, nothing again, still nothing. Eventually they realize the system changed. That's what happened to you. The old triggers don't control you like they once did. The old manipulation doesn't pull you back like it used to. The old guilt doesn't automatically make you apologize. The old fear doesn't decide your future. Because you finally understand yourself. And once you understand yourself, other people lose the ability to define you. That is your awakening. Not becoming cruel, not becoming emotionless, not becoming someone who never trusts again, becoming someone who trusts wisely, becoming someone who loves with boundaries, becoming someone who forgives without forgetting the lesson, becoming someone who can remain kind without remaining available to everything that harms them. That's the real transformation. They thought they were watching you lose your softness. They were wrong. You didn't lose your softness. You learned how to protect it. And that may be the strongest thing you have ever done. Because now your kindness is a choice. Your silence is a choice. Your presence is a choice. Your forgiveness is a choice. And most importantly, your access is a choice. Chosen one, remember this. You don't need to become someone else to become powerful. You need to stop abandoning who you already are. The world may have taught you to shrink. Pain may have taught you to doubt. People may have tried to define you, but none of them gets the final word. You do, and your next chapter isn't about proving them wrong. It's about finally living so fully that their opinion becomes irrelevant. They thought you were breaking, you were rebuilding, they thought you were disappearing. You were preparing. They thought you were losing your power. You were learning how to use it wisely. And now the person standing here is not the person they remember. You are clearer. You are wiser. You are stronger. And you are finally free to become everything you were afraid to become. The old version of you survived. The new version of you chooses. And that's the difference between merely surviving your story and finally becoming the author of it. You tried to stay pure, didn't you? You tried to stay kind. You tried to keep your intentions clean, your heart open, and your spirit untouched by the chaos around you. You kept believing that if you responded with kindness, people would eventually understand. If you gave patience, they would eventually appreciate it. If you showed loyalty, they would eventually return it. But some people don't know how to handle goodness. They test it. They take advantage of it. They mistake compassion for weakness. And eventually, you had to learn one of life's hardest lessons. Being a good person doesn't mean allowing everyone access to you. What they called your weakness became your training. Every betrayal taught you discernment. Every manipulation taught you to recognize patterns. Every disappointment taught you to trust actions more than promises. Every painful experience strengthened your ability to protect your peace. You didn't become bitter. You became aware. You didn't lose your heart. You learned how to guard it. And that is why the version of you standing here today feels so different. Your old triggers don't have the same power. The guilt trips don't work like they used to. The dramatic apologies don't automatically pull you back. The promises don't impress you without changed behavior. The emotional pressure doesn't control your decisions anymore. Why? Because you learned the pattern. And once you recognize the pattern, you stop confusing it with love. They may interpret your calmness as coldness, but it isn't coldness, it's clarity. They may interpret your silence as weakness, but it isn't weakness, it's self-control. They may interpret your distance as hatred, but sometimes distance is simply what happens when someone finally learns the value of peace. Imagine someone repeatedly pushing against a locked door and becoming angry because the door refuses to open. They blame the door, they call it heartless, they call it different. But the door isn't broken. It's closed for a reason. That's what your boundaries look like now. Their words don't have the same hooks. Their drama doesn't have the same entrance. Their chaos doesn't automatically become your chaos. And that's what they never expected. They thought they knew how to reach you. Now they don't. They thought they knew which buttons to press. Now those buttons don't control you. They thought they could pull you back into the same cycle. But you finally stepped outside the cycle. They didn't break your spirit. They taught you how to protect it, and you turned every lesson into wisdom. Number 6, when your silence became your freedom. Nothing changes a situation faster than the moment you stop feeding it your energy. Your transformation didn't happen overnight. It happened quietly, day after day. You gave less energy to people who constantly drained you. You stopped explaining every decision. You stopped defending yourself against every accusation. You stopped trying to make everyone understand your heart. And eventually, something beautiful happened. Peace became more important than being understood. Think about that. There was a time when you needed answers. You needed closure. You needed people to admit what they had done. You needed them to understand how deeply they hurt you. But healing taught you something different. Sometimes closure doesn't come from their apology. Sometimes closure comes from your acceptance that you no longer need one. You don't need someone who hurt you to validate your pain before you can move forward. You don't need someone who misunderstood you to suddenly understand you. You don't need someone who walked away to return. You can simply choose peace. And when you do, the emotional cord begins to disappear. Anger no longer controls you. Their opinion no longer defines you. Their behavior no longer determines your mood. You can remember what happened without allowing it to control what happens next. That is freedom. Your silence isn't emptiness, it's space. Space to think, space to heal, space to rebuild, space to hear your own voice again. And people who were used to having constant access to your emotions may not understand that. But they don't have to. Your peace doesn't require their permission. Number 7. When your silence started speaking for you. There is a kind of silence that comes from fear. And there is another kind that comes from strength. You have learned the difference. You no longer need to respond to every provocation. You don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. You don't have to correct every rumor. You don't have to answer every accusation. You don't have to prove your character to people committed to misunderstanding you. Sometimes the most powerful response is simply no response. Because when you stop reacting, you stop giving people control over your emotional state. They may send long messages you don't have to answer immediately. They may create unnecessary drama. You don't have to enter it. They may try to provoke you. You don't have to take the invitation. They may talk about you. You don't have to chase every conversation. Why? Because you finally understand something. Not everything deserves your energy. Your silence doesn't punish anyone. It protects you, and that's the difference. You aren't sitting around waiting for them to suffer. You're simply busy building a life where their behavior no longer determines your peace. Once you've experienced genuine peace, unnecessary chaos starts looking very expensive, and you stop paying for it. Number 8. When your stillness became your strength. Still water can be incredibly deep. And that's what people misunderstand about quiet people. They see stillness and assume there is nothing happening beneath the surface. But beneath your silence, you've been thinking, learning, healing, planning, growing, rebuilding. Your stillness wasn't surrender, it was preparation. While everyone else was focused on your reaction, you were focused on your direction. While they were talking, you were learning. While they were judging, you were rebuilding. While they were waiting for you to fall apart, you were becoming stronger. Imagine standing in the middle of chaos and refusing to become chaotic. That is mastery. Anyone can react. Anyone can shout. Anyone can make an impulsive decision. But staying grounded when everything around you is unstable, that's strength. You learned that you don't have to match someone's energy. You can remain calm. You can step away. You can think before responding. You can protect your dignity without becoming disrespectful. And that is why your stillness carries so much weight now. You're not absent, you're centered. You're not powerless, you're disciplined. You're not hiding, you're protecting your focus. Your transformation is happening in places where nobody is watching. And that's exactly why it's becoming so powerful. Number 9. When you became someone they could no longer manipulate. There was a time when you trusted words. Now you watch patterns. There was a time when an apology was enough. Now you look for changed behavior. There was a time when nostalgia could pull you backward. Now you remember why you moved forward. There was a time when someone saying "I miss you" could reopen an old door. Now you ask, why do you miss me, and what has actually changed? That's growth. You developed a new awareness. You started noticing patterns before they repeated. You began recognizing manipulation hidden inside concern, control hidden inside affection, guilt hidden inside apologies, and nostalgia used as a doorway back into an unhealthy cycle. That doesn't make you paranoid, it makes you discerning. You learn from experience. And experience changed the way you see people. Does that make you cold? No, it makes you complete. You can still love, you can still trust, you can still forgive. But now you understand that trust is earned, access is earned, respect is earned. And forgiveness doesn't automatically mean reconciliation. That's a lesson many people learn too late. You didn't become less compassionate. You became more responsible with your compassion. And now the old tactics don't work. The old guilt doesn't work. The old manipulation doesn't work. The old version of you is no longer available for the same cycle. You rewired your response. And that is why some people feel like they no longer know how to reach you. You didn't just move on, you moved forward. And there is a difference. Moving on says, "I don't want this anymore." Moving forward says, "I know where I'm going, and this can't come with me." Number 10. When your energy changed and their access expired. This is where the entire story changes. Because eventually you stop asking, why did they treat me like that? And you start asking, what am I building now? That question changes everything. Your focus shifts from their behavior to your future, from their opinions to your purpose, from their approval to your peace, from explaining your past to creating your next chapter. And suddenly, the people who once occupied so much space in your mind become background noise. Not because you hate them, because you have more important things to think about. Your energy is different. Your priorities are different. Your standards are different. Your boundaries are different. And when your life changes, your access list changes too. Some people will realize they no longer have the same place in your life. They may not understand why. They may even blame you. But remember, access is not a permanent contract. People can lose access through repeated disrespect. They can lose access through broken trust. They can lose access by continuously showing you that they don't know how to value what you gave them. And you are allowed to change the terms. You are allowed to say, "This no longer works for me." You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to build a future that doesn't include every person from your past. Chosen one, your greatest transformation isn't that you became untouchable. It's that you stopped needing to touch every battle. You stopped needing to win every argument. You stopped needing everyone to understand you. You stopped needing people who hurt you to validate your worth. You discovered something much more powerful. Your peace is enough. Your growth is enough. Your purpose is enough. Your life is enough. And the people who truly belong in your future won't require you to destroy yourself just to keep them comfortable. So keep your heart, keep your kindness, keep your compassion, but keep your boundaries too, because the strongest version of you isn't the one who feels nothing. It's the one who feels deeply and still chooses wisely. You are not becoming colder. You are becoming clearer. You are not losing people. You are losing patterns that were never meant to follow you forward. You are not becoming someone else. You are becoming more fully yourself. And when your energy rises, not everyone will have the capacity to come with you. That's okay. Let them stay where they are. You have somewhere to go. You have something to build. You have a life to live. And this time you are walking forward without carrying everyone who refused to walk beside you.